Now let's take a look at critical incidents and their effects on the workforce. In addition to everyday stressors at work and home, there are also times when we may experience a potentially traumatic event or crisis that is outside the norm of our usual experiences or stressors. When these types of events or critical incidents affect the workplace, supervisors play a key role in mitigating the potential for negative effects on employee functioning. A critical incident is when you have a trauma that is unexpected and it impacts the way employees feel about their own safety, as well as their ability to concentrate on the job and do what is expected. These might include robberies, an unexpected death, maybe a suicide of another employee. Even if something traumatic takes place outside of work, it can still have an effect on employees, such as accidents, natural disasters, or acts of terrorism. The CBP Employee Assistance Program can play an instrumental role in helping minimize the impact of traumatic events by providing mental health counseling and support to those employees and family members that are directly affected. The EAP can also consult with supervisors as a resource when a critical incident occurs. EAP staff are available to you to discuss concerns about the best way to deal with these kinds of issues. The CBP EAP also has debriefings available on site. We can arrange to have a counselor come and meet with your staff as a group and process the critical event. We would provide education and suggestions for constructively coping with whatever has occurred. Let me explain this debriefing a little more in detail. When faced with a critical incident, a person's normal coping abilities may be temporarily overwhelmed by the significant psychological reactions that often accompany such an event. A CISD is a structured process wherein the mental health counselor facilitates small groups of employees who were exposed to the traumatic event and want to participate in a group process. It's also important to understand what a CISD is not. These group meetings are not therapy, and we don't use the groups to address PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Mental health counseling can be conducted through one of our many therapists across the country to address this issue. A CISD is not used to investigate an incident or assist with any kind of administrative issues that may have come to the surface. What happens under the guise of a CISD is confidential within that group. That permits the participants to freely speak about their true reactions. Participants are urged not to discuss who said what outside the meeting. Group members may speak as much or as little as they desire during a CISD. As you can see from this slide and the next, these are the top 10 events that seem to cause the most stress within the law enforcement community. The violent death of a partner while on duty, someone you depend on and work with all the time, being removed from or losing a job, shooting or wounding someone while on duty, taking another's life while on duty, when another agent or officer commits suicide. Number 6 is witnessing the death of a coworker, a murder by another law enforcement officer, a violent injury that you sustain while on duty, a violent assignment that's related to the injury of another officer, and finally, being suspended from your job. All of these are very heavy emotional experiences that can take their toll on anyone. Unfortunately, you see these types of incidents more often than most. These are some of the common events that might prompt a supervisor to request a critical incident stress debriefing. So let's talk a little more specifically about CISDs. It's usually best to hold a CISD after at least 24 hours has lapsed. Employees should always be asked if they would like to participate and not be required to attend. CISDs usually last 1 or 2 hours depending on the number of participants, the intensity of the traumatic event, and how much discussion is generated by the group. It is best to hold the session in a place big enough for a circle of chairs where participants can comfortably sit, so a conference room or a room large enough for such a group. The room needs to be private and, whenever possible, not be in close proximity to the location of the traumatic event. The main goals of a CISD are to try and minimize the negative effects on the employees. We aim to assist and speed up the natural recovery process that employees are experiencing because of this out-of-ordinary event. The CISD also serves to identify employees who may be in need of additional counseling services beyond the group process. I have conducted dozens of CISDs myself, and on more than one occasion a participant has shared with me that they had second thoughts about attending the debriefing, but in every case they were glad they came. For some of them, they were simply glad to become more sensitive to what others were feeling. Often they were surprised at the reactions some people had, and in those cases they felt better knowing that others were touched in similar ways to them. CISDs can serve many purposes, not the least of which is to demonstrate how very connected we all are. That can be very comforting in and of itself. There are some risks to attending a CISD. Sometimes if the participants do not have all the facts of the events and then learn more details within the CISD, this can result in additional trauma, especially if those individuals were not directly exposed to the event. For this reason, we ask that the group of participants have the same level of exposure to the critical incident, so these discrepancies in experiences and facts of the event are not an issue. As the debriefing begins, the council will outline the process for the group, explain the need for confidentiality, and clarify that participation is voluntary. The council will give participants the opportunity to ventilate feelings that may have resulted from the experience of the traumatic event in a safe, helpful environment. Participants are educated about the possible reactions in the form of stress and grief and the best ways to cope with those reactions. The CISD itself can provide structure to a chaotic period and can impose a degree of closure to a traumatic experience. Participants also learn of additional supportive resources, such as the CBP EAP, should they feel a need for counseling services. The aftermath of a critical incident can be a stressful, uncertain time for employees and supervisors. Let us talk about the first steps for managers to take after a critical event occurs. First and foremost, we need to make sure the employees are safe. It is then important to alert security staff, the police or fire departments, whichever is the appropriate resource within the agency or even outside the agency, to address the incident. Inform appropriate personnel in your agency, such as human resources, executive management, or the designated trauma response or media relations coordinators. One of the most important things is to acknowledge to employees that the incident has occurred. This is of major importance because you need to communicate a spirit of understanding and let them know that the agency is conscious of the severity of the event and will do all they can to assist those affected. It is very important to provide as much factual information to your employees as possible. Squashing rumors and gossip will certainly be to the benefit of the agency, and the employees will appreciate your efforts in this vein. You also want to maintain consistency in your messages to all groups of employees. Be assertive in addressing any rumors that may be circulating or any concerns employees may voice. Before making employee announcements, check to see if your agency has relevant guidelines or policies about critical incidents. Remember that what is best for your traumatized employees is some form of structure and support and the simple facts of what they can expect. Sometimes this is all they can handle. This is particularly crucial if any of the individuals involved have inadequate supports at home. Before employees leave, find out what they're planning to do with their time once they leave. Encourage them to spend time with friends or family members who can offer them the support they will need. You will also want to identify employees whom you believe to be the most significantly affected by the traumatic event. You want to offer them a quiet place to be if that's what they are seeking. However, don't force them to isolate themselves if they prefer to stay with the other employees. Group support is very important. As a supervisor, it is helpful to know what you can expect from employees who are reacting to a crisis. Sometimes experiencing a trauma can really throw someone off kilter. A temporary state of upset occurs because a person's usual coping and problem-solving skills aren't working. Traumas or crises also present the potential for a very positive or very negative outcome. In most cases, crises are immediate, transient, and temporary. Let's talk a bit about the kinds of reactions you might experience yourself or witness in others who have been through a traumatic experience or critical incident. It's important to know that the presence of any of these symptoms does not mean there's anything wrong with the person having it, and it doesn't mean they are weak. All these reactions are normal reactions to abnormal events. There are certain common patterns of response to most crises. An individual's reaction to a crisis will include emotional reactions, the ones listed here: fear, guilt, anger, grief. They're the most common. A person's mental capacity may be impacted, causing difficulty with concentration and the negative consequences of nightmares, flashbacks, or just simply thoughts that intrude in their level of comfort. People can also have physical reactions similar to the ones we have already discussed when someone is affected by stress or anxiety. Behaviorally, sleep, eating, isolating, and being restless can also be common reactions. Supervisors can support employees by reassuring them that what they're experiencing is normal. People are comforted knowing that their reactions are not strange or out of the ordinary. If an employee reports extreme physical symptoms, always suggest that they talk to their medical doctor. Also refer them to professional services like the CBP, EAP, if emotional or behavioral reactions are severe or interfering with their daily functioning. According to John Everly, Ph.D., if we think of a crisis as a toxin, we can understand several important aspects of crisis intervention. A calm, reassuring approach is an antidote for anxiety. Structure is an antidote for chaos. Thinking is an antidote for dysfunctional emotions. Catharsis is an antidote for psychological tension and frustration. Information is an antidote for loss of control. Acceptance and social support are antidotes for alienation. And action is an antidote for helplessness. Supervisors can provide a calm and reassuring presence. Remember how we mentioned structure and calm as two crucial needs for employees that have experienced a crisis? By putting structure in place, you can assist the affected employees to think more rationally and reasonably about the incident and evaluate possible solutions so that the best course of action can be taken. Also, as I have mentioned, what a person thinks has a big impact on how they express their emotions, how they act. Therefore, you may need to educate those involved as to the facts of the matter so they're working with the truth and not inventions of their own mind. You want to allow employees to express their emotions honestly, as this will help with the tension and frustration that can build following such an incident. You want to create an environment that allows for the ventilation of feelings in a safe and accepting manner. Let employees know that you will be there to support them, or you will be putting in place methods for which they can be supported, such as a CISD. You want to be able to provide your employee with some sense of control, no matter how minimal. So, find a way to allow them some power over even small decisions that may be affecting them going forward. Grief is a normal, natural reaction to any type of loss, from the loss of a coworker to the loss of a formerly held sense of safety and security that may occur after a traumatic event. Grief is a healthy process that enables the griever to deal with a loss over time and eventually return to normal functioning. When a critical incident or a traumatic event occurs in the workplace, those affected may show signs that they are grieving. This is a common reaction. By being aware of the grief process, you will be better prepared to support your employees. Let's review the stages in this process. However, keep in mind that not all people will experience each stage, and not all will experience them in this sequence. In fact, sometimes people can go back and forth between stages. Grief can be a roller coaster, and it is important for supervisors to be sensitive to that. Also, be aware that everyone handles grief and trauma in their own personal way. What I'm about to go over are the general reactions one may experience. These are very common, but the manifestation of these in each individual can be very different. The most common first reaction to grief or even to a trauma is shock and denial. It is easier to deny the initial information than absorb it instantly. People sometimes need to keep the incident at a distance, so to speak, in order to be able to fully acknowledge what has happened. Anger is not uncommon as a reaction, and it's often misdirected. With anger can come some feelings of guilt as well. Sometimes people experience sadness and despair. A person may become tearful or feel somewhat lonely as well. Acceptance of loss or trauma or change comes with time. Acceptance doesn't mean the loss of the trauma is acceptable, but rather the person is able to accept the facts and then move on. Gradually, the feelings of grief will subside. Remember, grieving is unique to each person. Keep in mind that there is no set time frame for how long it will take someone to fully resolve his or her grief. People may also move back and forth through these stages of grief. Expect that while a person affected by a trauma may be functioning normally now, certain events or situations weeks or even months after the traumatic event may trigger an intense emotional response. If you have employees who have been affected by a trauma, crisis, or grief, what is the best way to approach them? It is not uncommon to feel a bit uncertain or even be uncomfortable approaching an employee in such a situation, not because you don't want to be supportive, but because you may not feel sure of how to help or what to say. Here are a few strategies that can be helpful. Many people are too tired or numb to decide what help they really need. Coworkers who are not directly involved can try to offer things to the employee that may present a challenge to that person at this particular time, like making meals, offering to help with errands, or helping with child care. Don't wait until the right thing to say comes along. There is no right thing. The wrong thing is to say nothing. So if you're not sure what to say, then say just that and tell the employee you just want them to know you are there for support. What you do know is how you felt in this situation or in a similar situation, but we never really know another person's feelings. Everyone's relationships and reactions are unique, so telling someone that you know just how they feel would not be a good thing. Telling the story is also part of the healing process, but you need to speak up if the time isn't right. For example, you might say, "John, I'm sorry I can't talk with you right now, but let's continue this over coffee this afternoon." Just don't be surprised if you hear the account of what happened more than once. This is not so unusual. As a manager and supervisor, you are responsible for fostering a safe, productive, and respectful work environment. This is an important point when dealing with employees affected by trauma or grief. When a coworker or employee you are supervising is grieving or recovering from a traumatic event, the needs of the workplace and the needs of the affected workers may conflict. Let's review some tips that may be helpful in this situation. In order to support a grieving employee or one who has been through a traumatic event, a supervisor should do the following. Working through grief takes time, and we can't expect someone to snap out of it. The grieving process is important and necessary and requires your patience. The hard work of grief is also lonely work. What you can do is to help create an environment that is supportive of the grief process. You want to express care and support to those employees affected by grief. Doing so will set a standard that will last long after this experience and provide a model for all your employees. It is good to keep in contact with the employee if they haven't yet returned back to work. Coworkers might agree on one person to represent them, but supervisors should make sure they stay in touch as well. You also want to keep in mind that the CBP Employee Assistance Program can provide additional support to both you and the employee, so don't hesitate to contact us or to remind the employee that the CBP EAP counseling services are private, confidential, and are available at no cost to employees 24/7. Keep in mind that the use of the CBP EAP can prevent more serious issues from developing down the road.